Well, welcome everybody to the County Conservation Meeting, and thank you for joining us for our first virtual meeting. And today's session that you are in now is the financial implications of COVID-19 on counties. And this is Penny Pulley from Wisconsin Land+Water, so I'm happy to have you joining us today. And thank you to Extension for all of their assistance with the County Conservation Meeting and for providing this Zoom platform that we are all now getting used to. And we're going to skip Dan giving you any little introductions, but we're going to be taking questions through the chat line as we have been doing the last few days. And that is on your screen. You just type those in. And then for this session, we're going to have a little video. And then after that, Kyle Christianson is going to be answering the questions in the chat line. Today, Dan Knapp was unable to join us. He's from the Forward Analytics, but he did put together a presentation on a video that we will be playing. It's about, I think, 18 minutes in length. And we are very happy to have Kyle Christianson from the Wisconsin Counties Association here to answer all of the questions that you may have from Dale's presentation. And also, he's going to be giving us some policy updates. So Kyle Christianson serves as the WCA Director of Government Affairs, where he manages the association's lobbyists and leads Wisconsin Counties Association lobbying efforts, both in Madison and in Washington, D.C. He is responsible for overseeing all legislative activities impacting county government and for establishing strategies to achieve successful legislative outcomes. Kyle provides regular updates on legislative matters to the WCA Board of Directors and county officials throughout the state. He also oversees the coordination of the association's 5 steering committees. Prior to joining WCA in July of 2012, Kyle worked as a policy analyst for the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, where he focused on state and local fiscal policy. A UW-La Crosse grad, Kyle holds a degree in political science and public administration, and with an emphasis on public policy implementation and evaluation. So again, send your questions into the chat box, and we'll get to those shortly after the video gets done. So Christina, you want to take it away?
Sure thing.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, not actually be here. I am off enjoying some of Wisconsin's camping and kayaking up at Willow River, but it's good to be with you virtually anyway today. What I'm going to talk about today are some of the financial implications of the COVID-19 virus and the shutdowns, et cetera, and the financial impact of what's going on counties. And I will warn you that while we do know some things, there are a lot of things that we don't know. And so this is really fluid, ever-changing. And so what we have been doing at Forward Analytics, which is the research arm of the Wisconsin Counties Association, what we have been doing has been updating approximately monthly our county officials on these economic impacts to give them a sense of where they are and where they might be going. And one of the things that we found, and which you'll see today, is that there are really some surprising things going on at the county level. It's not, the impacts are far from uniform. So let me, as a setup here, just talk briefly, and you probably know much of this, but briefly about the timeline, which will give you a sense of some of the data, the timing of some of the data that we're talking about today. So the first, as we all know, that the first case of COVID-19 was reported in China in January. On the January 20th, the first U.S. case was identified in Washington. February 5th was the first case here in Wisconsin, and those numbers gradually increased in the state, so that by mid-March, what we had was Governor Evers ordering all schools to be closed. And so this is the time the early mid-March, when we started to see some small impacts in the state. But then March 24th, the Safer at Home order, all non-essential businesses were closed. And that's where you really begin to see the biggest impacts, economic impacts of the virus and the response to the virus. When the March 24th order expired, the Governor Evers and his Department of Health extended it for another month. However, the Supreme Court struck that down as unconstitutional. So while that order would have taken us through Memorial Day, it really ended halfway through May. And since that time, we've had various county reactions in terms of stay-at-home orders, et cetera. So in the second half of May, we really had a very, very diverse impacts across the state, with some counties essentially continuing the stay-at-home order, other counties really allowing everything to open up. So in a macro sense, what are we seeing? And just to give you, and this sort of gives you a sense of the big picture. One of the ways that we measure the economic impact is real GDP. And just to give you a sense, we were kind of chugging along at about 2.1% growth in terms of real GDP nationally. We saw a 5% drop in the first quarter of 2020. And we don't have the numbers out yet for the second quarter, which ended in June. But the consensus of economists out there is that we're going to see a 35% decline in real GDP in the second quarter of this year. This is unprecedented in our history. Unemployment rose from 3.5% in February to almost 15% nationally in April, and then dropped a little bit to 11% in May. Wisconsin's trend was the same. The numbers, Wisconsin's unemployment rate generally is lower than the U.S., so our unemployment has been a little bit lower, but followed that same pattern. I will say the real unemployment rate is probably higher than that, and that's because of, and I'm not going to get into this, but some of the technicalities surrounding the unemployment survey and how things are classified within there. So we were probably looking at April unemployment somewhere between 15 and 20%, both nationally and in Wisconsin. The 11% in May is probably closer to 12 or 13%. The Federal Reserve, and between the Federal Reserve acting and the couple of federal government stimulus packages has helped limit the damage. You know, particularly the stimulus payments has sort of kept consumer spending up to some degree, and the PPP stimulus has helped businesses continue to pay their employees during this time. So the Fed has really helped limit the economic damage, but it's also masking some economic consequences, because some of that payment, the paycheck protection payments, helped keep employees on payrolls for a while, but once that runs out, you know, it's unclear how many of those businesses are going to be able to continue to pay their employees, and so it's sort of masking, really, to some degree, what the long-term impacts are going to be. And there are going to be other long-term impacts in terms of national debt, et cetera. So we're not going to worry about those, but there's some good that comes out of this, and there's some things we're going to pay for really in the long term. So let's turn to counties. First, I want to give you just a picture of what the average county's revenues look like. The latest data we have is from 2018. Property taxes and state aid are the two big revenue sources. Because state aid was determined in the last budget, there's really not an impact there. Property taxes, for the most part, have been paid and will be paid, although some counties, because of a bill passed earlier this year, the July, essentially the July payment can be put off if the county approves it to later in the year. So there might be a delay. There might be some short-term financial consequences, but we generally don't expect this year to see much overall impact in terms of property taxes and state aid. The fees and charges, some counties have museums, zoos, golf courses, et cetera, that they bring in revenue from those to run those operations. So some counties will have had some impact on fees and charges. Those are really hard to quantify at this point. We just don't have the data, and we don't think that they're very large. The biggest impact by far is going to be on sales taxes. Counties rely on average on the sales tax for about 8% of revenues. And that's the area that's going to take a big hit. And that's the area that we have data on right now to sort of see what's going on. And let me just say, the impact is not just going to be on the decline or the increase in sales taxes, but how much they rely on them. Dane, Marathon, Ozaukee, St. Croix, Sauk, and Washington County rely on that revenue source for the largest, or are most reliant on that revenue source. At least 12% of their revenues come from that source. Adams, Bayfield, Florence, Forest, Iron, Kewaunee, Marquette, Rusk, and Waushara rely very little on the sales tax, less than 5% of their revenues. So Manitowoc, Racine, Waukesha, Winnebago, they do not have the sales tax, so their budgets are going to be impacted less than these other counties. The tax was implemented this year in Outagamie and Menominee, so we don't have historic data, so we really don't know what the overall impact is going to be in those counties. So this is the most surprising result that we have out there. This is total taxable sales in March and April, and what we thought was going to happen is that we were going to be down throughout the state. Instead, what you see is Burnett County, Polk County, up almost 7% in terms of their sales. We saw other rural, particularly rural counties, with increases in their sales in March and April of 2020 versus 2019. You had Sauk County down 31%, by far the biggest hit of all of the counties. And you see the urban counties, Dane and Milwaukee and Brown counties, Marathon County with fairly large hits in terms of taxable sales. We're not sure what's going on there, but we do think that it has to do with some of these counties, residents in some of these counties might be heading to urban counties for much of significant portion of their purchases. With the Safer at Home, they were buying things online or shopping local there. But that's just a theory. We really don't know. One of the things that DOR data allow us to do is break down these declines by industry, by where those dollars are coming from. And obviously, accommodations and food service, the biggest hits. This year, 73% decline in Sauk County, 63% in Adams, 73% in Florence. So big hits really across the state, 40, 50% everywhere, some much larger than that. We expect that to come back. The question there is going to be how much of a bounce back are we going to see, especially now that we're seeing COVID-19 cases, sort of on the rise again. So this is a big question mark going forward. The other big sector, really the biggest sector, is retail sales, and this really explains the earlier graph. What's driving that difference, across the state is the retail sales up 19% in Burnett County, 16% in Polk County. A lot of counties actually saw increases in their retail sales compared to 2019. And again, we think it has to do with online shopping, and probably it has to do with shopping at home. So where we thought we were going to see declines across the state in these areas, some counties, especially rural counties, are holding their own and actually growing compared to last year. Whether that holds through the end of the year, we just don't know. And then there's all other retail sales, all other taxable sales, which is a whole variety. And that, again, we see a mixed picture throughout the state. So that's sort of this general picture of what it looks like. Now, one of the things that we've been doing is, as I mentioned, is we've been updating the county officials on these numbers, on what their budgets as they look, and it's this constantly evolving picture that we're getting. And when we look ahead, this is one of the real challenges for economists, for forecasters, because this is unprecedented for us. And so we don't know what COVID-19 is going to look like in the fall. We don't even know what it's going to look like in August, really. We don't know what the recovery is going to look like. Some economists are saying it's going to be a V shape. In other words, we went down severely, we're going to bounce back up. Other economists think it's going to be more of a U. In other words, we're going to decline, we're going to stay at a low level and then kind of recover. There's a lot of uncertainties of the financial impact for counties. Again, this is evolving. We'll have some new information on what happened in May in terms of sales. We should have that within a couple of weeks, and that'll give us a better picture of what the impacts at the county level are going to be, and we will probably put out a report on that. But this is going to be something that the counties are facing all the way through 2021. So the impact is on counties is varied. It's really a smorgasbord of impacts from positive to negative. Now it's not positive, but doing better in terms of at least sales taxes in some counties than others. But it's a mixed bag, and so I think when you think about this, we cannot think about this in terms of statewide impact. We have to think about this as local and regional. What I would encourage you to do, there are a couple of links here in this report, in this presentation. We did a report on this economic activity in terms of the sales tax about a month ago, and there's a link there to that. I would encourage you to take a look at that. It gives you a little bit more in-depth picture of what the economic impact has been so far. And then the maps that you saw we actually have interactive maps that you can go to, and you can click and see, detailed information about, individual counties. And so there's a link to that as well. And I would encourage you to take a look at those, and it'll give you a better, a better picture of the county or counties that you're interested in. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for inviting me here today. Keep an eye out for more forward analytics reports on these impacts as we go through the summer and fall, because again, we will continuously update our members in terms of where they are and what the rest of the year kind of looks like. And then in the fall, we'll be looking at what 2021 is looking like for county finances. So thank you for your time. I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Christina, for sharing that. And I see Kyle is ready for some questions. We've been sharing links in the chat line. Thanks, Matt, for putting the one off the video there. And I put in the links earlier for Wisconsin Counties Association and also for Forward Analytics. So you'd be sure to check their websites out for more information. So please send in your questions through the chat box for Kyle regarding the presentation. And I guess, Kyle, maybe while we're waiting for some of those to come in, why don't you maybe add to that video and maybe give us some policy updates if you could?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Can you hear me, Penny?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in your conference. I'm sure that we all wish we could have done this in person, but given some of the limitations that we're dealing with, I'm really happy that you guys decided to move forward with this, because I think it's important that we continue to get together, continue to exchange ideas, share thoughts, because going forward, probably more so over the next 12 months, we're going to have to work together more closely than ever to really protect county interests in the legislative process. So let me start with kind of giving a legislative update. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and I'll be sure to answer those, either about anything that I cover or don't cover. But maybe where we start on the legislative front is with kind of where are we at? What's happening? What's not happening, etc. So we'll start at the state level. In Wisconsin, the legislature is essentially in recess, which means that they are not coming in on the floor. There are not really many committee meetings occurring. In fact, the Capitol remains closed to the public for the most part. So not a lot happening in Madison right now, other than what we've gotten very used to, which is the governor and the legislature not getting along at all. Unfortunately, the disputes between the two branches of government, of course, Democrat Tony Evers and then the Republican majorities in the legislature, that relationship, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, I keep telling everyone, I don't think that the relationship can get any worse, and I continue finding myself incorrect, because it seems like the finger pointing, the back and forth, the bickering, the legal battles continue, and I think it's really unproductive for not only counties but also the state of Wisconsin when we have these two entities that really can't even get together and communicate without doing it publicly. So that's unfortunate. But I think that's partly resulting in not only a lack of legislative activity, but also just a lack of state action as well. And part of that is due to some of the legal battles, as Dale mentioned in his recorded video. The Supreme Court has weighed in on a few different things, especially the authority of the state and the state health secretary. So I think the administration feels like their hands are tied on some things, and the legislature has kind of in some ways abdicated its responsibility as well to local government. So legislature's not in session. The Assembly did officially adjourn back in March. They did not plan to come back. However, they did return to pass what was known as Wisconsin Act 185. That was the state's response to COVID-19. That bill did a number of things related to unemployment. It provided some funding for the COVID response, but there wasn't a whole lot in that bill. But that bill was done in special session. It was approved by the Assembly, approved by the Senate, and then less than an hour later, it was signed into law by the governor. So what we still have, as far as legislatively, what we still have are a number of bills kind of hanging out there. And I know that a number of these bills are particular interest to this group because it includes a lot of the bills from the Speaker's Task Force on Water Quality, and especially the Land Conservation Funding Bill. So that bill and other bills from the task force were approved by the Assembly before they adjourned. And then it was expected that the Senate would come and take up those bills in March. Of course, then we had the pandemic, and the Senate really has not returned in regular session to take up those bills. So I do expect that the Senate is going to come back, but it's probably not going to be November. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So while there's not a lot of activity occurring at the state level, in the state capitol, it's really the complete opposite of the federal level. The federal government has passed 4 what I'll call stimulus bills related to COVID-19. They've been kind of numbered a little goofy. So their first bill was Stimulus 1, the second Stimulus 2, the third Stimulus 3, and then the most recent bill that they've called Stimulus 3.5. So there's actually 4 bills that the federal government has passed. The largest of those bills was the CARES Act. And that bill did a number of things, but maybe most importantly, it provided direct aid to states who are dealing with, of course, revenue shortfalls and having to deal with really a high number of unbudgeted expenditures as well. In Wisconsin, the federal government allocated about $2.3 billion to the state of Wisconsin. That money, outside of about $200 to $300 million of it, has already been allocated for different things. For example, a large amount of that money went to purchase personal protective equipment, or PPE. There were payments to hospitals, there were payments to universities, and the governor also announced what he's called the routes to recovery, and that was aids to local government. So within the allocation that the state received from the CARES Act, the governor has proposed about $95 million for counties. Now, how this works is that counties can apply for reimbursement for expenses incurred related to COVID-19, and then apply for reimbursement, and the state will reimburse those expenses, assuming that they were 1, unbudgeted, but 2, they were also related to COVID. Now, there are a number of restrictions on these funds, but I'd encourage you, if you haven't, make sure you talk with your county colleagues and really talk about any expenses that you may be incurring or other departments may be incurring, and get those submitted for reimbursement from the state. So that was kind of the big piece that the federal government did. What we're doing now in partnership with other entities, along with the governor's office, is we're pushing the federal government for what is essentially a 5th stimulus bill. A few weeks ago, the United States House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act. That was about $3 trillion in total spending, but included, again, direct aid to states and counties, and the funding would have been more flexible. One of the problems with the funding that the federal government has provided states thus far is there have been prohibitions from using that funding on lost revenue. Well, as we know, as Dale talked about, and as all of us are well aware of, our revenues are going to be down significantly and potentially at an unprecedented level. So if we can't use additional funds from the federal government or state government to offset those lost revenues, we're going to have major problems. So we are proposing another stimulus package. Again, the House did pass the HEROES Act, about $3 trillion. That bill will not pass the United States Senate, nor would the president sign that. So right now you have negotiations occurring in Washington between the White House, Senate Republicans, and House Democrats on a fourth package. The White House has indicated that they would like to see the majority of the funding in that package allocated for targeted businesses and targeted industries. That is their main priority. Unfortunately, the House Democrats, who have majorities in that chamber, have made direct aids to state and counties and flexible direct aids their top priority. So like everything else in politics, there's going to be a lot of give and take, but we are hopeful that there will be another stimulus package that provides funding to states and counties throughout the country that will help address some of the revenue losses and other challenges that we're currently dealing with. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at right now. But I think it's also important that we kind of look ahead to kind of what's next. As I mentioned, I know something that's critical to this group is the County Conservation Funding Bill that was really drafted by the task force at the request of Wisconsin Land and Water. So kudos to Matt and Penny and the team for really getting that to be a priority of the legislature. That bill's hanging out there. I think 4 months ago, I think that bill probably would have passed the Senate. Right now, the challenge is not that there's not support for that or other bills from the Water Quality Task Force, but rather the state's revenue picture is looking so bleak that really anything with a fiscal note, any bill that spends money, is probably not going to happen in November when the Senate returns. So I know that that's not great news, but I think the silver lining is that there is still support for these bills and for county conservation programs and county conservationists. The support is there, but unfortunately the state's fiscal picture is going to really make, I think, the legislature pull in the reins, at least in calendar year 2020, and really not spend any money. There will be, I think, some cuts that they'll propose to some programs. I don't think any of those will be counties when they return in November, but I don't expect that there will be a lot of new spending, or really any new spending approved by the Senate when they return. So that kind of leads us to, well, if there's not, we're not going to see a lot of action in 2020, what about 2021? And I think that's where it's going to be more critical than ever to really be proactive in what we're trying to do, because I think the state's fiscal picture and the revenues the state's going to have to deal with in the next budget, which essentially the governor is already working on and will be introduced in late January or early February. It's basically the first thing that'll happen in 2021 when the legislature returns. There's not going to be any money. And that's a major challenge. I think when you look at the state budget, while there are thousands of items within that budget that are funded, the real money falls into what I would say would be 5 different pots, right? The majority of the money goes to K-12 education. It goes to the university system. It goes to the Medicaid program. It goes to corrections, state prisons, and then it goes to local government. So if you're in a budget with a $600, $700, $800, $900 million shortfall, whatever that number may be, there's not many places you can cut because you only have those 5 buckets. And when you drill down into those buckets, I don't think that the governor has any interest in allowing K-12 education to be cut. In fact, I know that he doesn't. So that's kind of off the table. The university system is hemorrhaging cash and money as we speak, and there's no knowing kind of how long they're going to be able to operate, when kids potentially come back in the fall to school. So it'd be difficult to cut them. The state isn't going to cut the Medicaid program at a time with record unemployment levels. The state isn't going to release all the prisoners from the state prisons. So what's really left, the only thing left there is aids to local governments. And I think, again, that's why we're going to have to be more proactive than we've ever been in really advocating for counties, not only advocating for new resources, which I think we all know are critically needed, but also advocating to maintain the resources that we have. So we're already meeting with legislators, meeting with the governor's office, and really talking about all the stresses that the pandemic has placed on counties and all the additional services that we've been providing as a result of the pandemic. And really trying to make the case preemptively that if there was ever a bad time to cut counties, now would be it. This would be about the worst time to do it. So I think that's where what I'd ask from this group and every other group that is part of the county family, it's really important to start reaching out to legislators now and start making those connections. If you don't know your legislator, please reach out to them, introduce yourself. If you do know them, please call them and tell them about the work you're doing and the challenges that you're facing. Because, as the old saying goes, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. And the last thing that we want to see is the county voice not being heard in the Capitol. The other reason I think it's so important right now to start reaching out to legislators is that we don't know what 2021 is going to look like. We have no idea if we're going to be able to have lobby days at the Capitol, or if you're going to be able to come from Bayfield or Brown or Vernon County to Madison to meet with your legislator. We don't know if that's going to be possible. So what that may leave a lot of people with is, unless you have a relationship with your state senator or state representatives and you can pick up the phone and call them on their cell phone, you're probably going to be pretty limited in your ability to communicate with these folks. So I think the more that you can start that relationship building now, I think the better it'll be. I guess to kind of close on maybe a more optimistic note, while the state's revenue picture is going to be bleak, and it may be worse than anything we've seen in the last 50, 60 years, I do think that there remains momentum for additional funding for county conservation efforts as relate to water quality. I think that as the legislature continues to focus on water issues, continues to tour the state, they're still hearing about water issues. I had a meeting with the governor's office last week, and one of the things that they want to talk about was water. So while there's not going to be a lot of flexibility in providing funds, I do think that water and conservation efforts are still high on the radar of both legislative leadership and the governor, and I think that's positive. I think there's potentially momentum for us to get some things done there, but it's going to be much more difficult given the state's financial outlook than it otherwise may have been. So with that, I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions that we have from the chat.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. We do have a couple questions, and we have about 5 minutes left. So one question is, I've heard that some counties will lose timber sales revenue this year due to pulp plant closure. Can you speak to this? Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I just I'm working right now on scheduling a meeting with the Wisconsin County Forest Association, who has surveyed its county members, and as many of you probably know, for these counties that do have county forests, timber sales make up a significant portion of their budget. It may not be large in numbers, but it's money that's dependent on. So that's something that the County Forest Association and us are both looking into.
I can tell you that I've raised that issue also with the DNR and the governor's office to try to make them aware. And we're looking at kind of creative ways that potentially we can get timber to the plants that may be even located outside Wisconsin. So this is an issue that we're working on.
Great. Well, we certainly appreciate all your help, Kyle, with promoting the counties and assisting us with that. So Greg from Eau Claire County said, utilizing the first half of 2020 sales tax revenue compared to the first half of 2019 has only seen a decrease of approximately $6,450. Yet I am not an economist, but our fiscal folks within the county are predicting a $1.7 million shortfall. Can you shed some light on other considerations which may be contributing to the $1.7 million shortfall?
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well. And let me preface this by saying I'm also not an economist, and that's why maybe Dale should have been here. But I think the reason, when you look at the sales tax numbers that are reported, there's essentially a lag in those numbers from the Department of Revenue. And that lag can be multiple months. So for example, when a county receives a payment in, let's say, May, that may have been actually for sales tax collections that occurred in February, March, and April, or at least partially. So I think one of the worries is that while we have sales tax data that doesn't look all that bad in some counties, it may be more of a time lag issue than it is kind of reality. So that's on the sales tax front. I think when we also talk about revenue shortfalls, of course, the biggest source of local revenue is the property tax. And what we still don't know, because property taxes aren't due until July, the end of this month, what we don't know is how many people are actually going to pay their taxes. And that I think is a major concern, not only from a cash flow perspective, but also from a budgetary perspective. So if we have, let's say, 10 to 15% delinquencies in property taxes, those numbers are so large compared to sales tax that's where you could get these shortfalls, in the millions of dollars. So my guess, Greg, is that's probably what they're looking at, kind of the uncertainty surrounding property taxes, but also the potential lag in data from the Department of Revenue on the sales tax piece, where it may look, DOR may be giving a more rosy picture than reality would actually say.
Okay, we have time for maybe another question or two out there. I guess one thing that was said by Kyle is that we need to be more proactive and to be getting out there. So that's, again, means all of us need to be getting out there, contacting our legislators and letting them know what the county does and how we're boots on the ground and what we can accomplish. And so we don't see those cuts coming next year in 2021, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's critical. And I know, one of the difficulties in working with county government is sometimes we don't like to talk about all the good things that we're doing, but it's really, really critical that you do that, because if the legislature and the governor start debating whether to cut a certain program, in my mind, there's no doubt that program's getting cut. It's just to what extent. So we have to kind of take ourselves off the chopping block before those conversations even occur. So to talk about the local stories of, here's what we're doing at the local level, here are the people that I'm helping, here are the benefits that they're seeing. I think we can do that now proactively. Hopefully it never even turns to that next discussion of, well, how much are we going to cut these people by? So I do think that's really important, Penny.
Great. Okay. And Elliot in our office has been doing different success stories to trying to help some of those stories out there. DACAP has their annual report that they put out that has a lot of different stories and data in there. So those are resources. And Matt obviously is quite involved in that and will help us with that. But on that, there is some hope. And we appreciate your input and your support, Kyle, and Wisconsin Counties Association. I think that's about it. I don't see any more questions, and it's perfect timing
Okay.
to move on to our next presentation. So if you stay in this room at 10:45, we're going to have the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, Cutting Edge Climate Data in Your Own Backyard. So you can just remain in here. If you want to go to room B, that's going to be assessing well data, and that'll also be starting in 5 minutes. And I think that's about it. Oh, and room C, there's a closed session for the county conservationists. So if you are a county conservationist, please join that discussion by finding that link in your virtual agenda. Otherwise, I think we're going to get started with our next one. So thank you everyone for joining us, and hope you're enjoying the virtual county conservation meeting. Thank you.